All right, so before we get to the panel and the knowledge exchange, raise your hand, trying to understand who's in the cloud in the room. I think it would help us orient some of our knowledge and comments and maybe even direct questions to you guys. So raise your hand if you work for a company that is publicly traded. Couple, great. Raise your hand if you work for what I would call a large company, $100 million in revenue or more. Okay. Raise your hand if you work for a mid-sized company, somewhere between $10 million in annual revenue to $100 million. And raise your hand if you work for a company that has no revenue. So everybody else is in between, right? Like somewhere, some revenue but less than 10. Okay. All right. This session, this meetup, is focused on the technology side of meetups. We try to create in the group that we're organizing these meetups, a calendar of events on a monthly basis and attack different subjects and topics, right? So we talk about playbooks, we talk about profile of people to hire, we talk about types of revenue and goals. This one is all about tools. So again, raise your hand if in the company you work at right now, you utilize in this customer success arena more than 10 different tools. Go Nilu. That's Nilu. Raise your hands if you have in the company you work at right now between 5 and 10 tools. About half. 2, 3, 4. Only one? No tools? I would like to suggest that most of you use more tools in this arena than you acknowledge. Right? If you think about the tools we use, we have CRM tools, we have customer success platform tools, we have case management tools for the support side that often interacts with the CSMs. You have survey tools that I'm sure many of you use for NPS or customer satisfaction or whatever. And when you start to think about all of these different platforms, right, the needs that we have, you'll probably find that you use more tools that you want. And part of the conversation we would like to have is, how do you make sense out of this? What to use when, etc. So why don't we start with, who do we have to listen to? And I'll to save a little bit of time, I'll give you a little bit of the background and embarrass these two folks.
That's not going to be hard to do.
They have at least 3 things in common. One, they've been in this space of customer success more than 20 years each. So it's separate.
Treat our age like the sun.
Yeah. 2, both of them are avid riders of motorcycles. I think there's a correlation between that and CS. Must have been. I mean, I don't know how else.
Go fast.
Expand, exactly. And they both good look much better looking good in. Look better than me, which I think is a correlation that is important to explain. Keri has been, started her career, now the differences. So Keri started her career in customer success as a product manager in a telecom company that was building tools and capabilities that are starting to become more recurring in nature, VoIP, etc., and understood her, or got a preliminary insight into the customer success from that perspective, and then evolved into more hardcore customer success, mostly at larger companies, Host Analytics, Human Concept that was acquired by Saba, right? And then even bigger with Oracle, and recently employee number 1 in the customer success team at Juniper, a very large company that it's about time established a customer success function, and someone needs to do it, right?
That's right.
Exactly.
Somebody has to be first.
And she has been deploying multiple customer success automation tools, Blue Nose and Zendesk and Salesforce and Acton and Outreach and lots of wealth of information.
Yeah.
Gainsight. Mark, on the other hand, not on the other hand. Mark started his career actually in the customer support side of things. And worked at such companies as SuccessFactors and Sybase and Commerce One, and found kind of the hone in on more of the customer success, evolved from the support side into that space, and walked into much larger companies, morphed into kind of that area with Soesta, that was acquired by Akamai, Whitehead Security, Accelerator, that is now part of Axway here, right? So some of what we do here is because of you, I guess. And most
Adding value already.
and most recently with Conviva, and spent the last few. I guess you were probably one of the. If we were to give an award to someone who deployed the most software solutions, you'll be applying for that. 3 times Strikedeck, 3 times Blue Nose, twice client success. Just lots of breadth of information.
And they're all represented here.
Yeah,
That's right.
that's true.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool. So let's start with the folks when we ask to raise hands. Some at large companies, some at small companies. Some have worked with many customer success automation tools, some with fewer. Maybe start with you, Mark. The companies that you work at, which of the solutions, customer success automation solution, you found most useful and you found the most interest in deploying?
Is this on?
No, you need to turn it on, it needs to be green.
You got it.
That's called a workaround. So what was the adjective you used?
The one that you found most useful and you enjoyed the most deploying.
It's a trick question.
He said he was going to challenge you.
I know. I think what's interesting about the landscape of technology is all these platforms and tools aren't the same. And so really the challenge is understanding the business need, the interaction with the customer, and aligning the right tools, platforms with that so groups can scale and be more efficient. What's interesting about all of these tools is as an operating executive, buying software doesn't solve a problem, right? If you're building, customer success, buying a software tool is not going to do anything for you out of the gate. How are you trying to engage with your customer? What's their journey? What's your cadence helping them? What's your mission? Are you responsible for renewals, adoption, et cetera? And once you figured out that piece of the puzzle, then applying the right technology gets really exciting because it kind of brings the process to life in a way you can manage, measure, scale, and start to iterate. So, I've enjoyed all the tools I've used for the applications they're intended for. So trying to put a square peg in a round hole is going to be a failure, right? And so that's the challenge, is there's a lot out there. There's a ton of new companies, right? So at the end, it's really finding the right process and the right, business solution you're trying to solve.
Keri, lots of background, lots of experience, 25 years prepared you for this moment where you're employee number 1 at a very large company.
Yeah.
What's the focus from a technology perspective? Where would you start? What type? Not necessarily names of companies, but
Sure.
what functionality are you looking to automate first?
Yeah, and it's actually a very timely question because Juniper's never done customer success before. And they've got functions that flirt with the concepts of customer success, but they've never really had a dedicated program to deliver and assure retention and growth, right? They've always done these amazing acts of heroics, and there's 10,000 heroes that quite literally that work at Juniper. And what's fascinating is a lot of their systems, as you can imagine at a legacy tech company, are very disparate. Not only are they disparate, but they're old, and they've been in use for a very long time. And a lot of that technology hasn't really evolved in the way that you would see with, a startup or an organization that maybe even may be mid-stage. And so my first area of focus, and you're going to hear Mark talk about this a lot, is my first area of focus is really getting not necessarily the tool itself, but the master customer record. So I have to have a single source of truth, and from there, all good things come. And so that's really where I'm beginning.
Is that more of a CRM type solution?
That's right. I'm starting at square one with a CRM solution. We do have something that smells like a CRM solution, but it needs some help. And the good news is that they're probably 3/4 of the way there and they don't even know it. So it's so for me that's a great place to start. the customer record. Now, again, then you can leverage all of your programs and your processes and your data, your metrics, all of the things when you have something to act in some place to put all of your information.
So it sounds, if I can kind of read between the line, is automation is important, but not yet.
Not
So
at Juniper.
Is automation important? Well, not necessarily.
Yes, automation is critical, but you can't automate if you don't have a customer record, because how do you know what you're automating? In my mind. And one of the things that I'll be grappling with is if I don't have, and this is, I'm stealing your thunder because we talked about this just a little while ago, but if I don't have customer records, it's going to be really hard for me to run metrics and understand who my customers are and what they have and what kind of program am I going to run, and if, in the event that I have a customer that churns, well, how am I going to track that so that I can then track my systemic issues and fix all of those things? So at Juniper, that's the place that I need to begin. Now, in other organizations that I've worked for, that hasn't been the place that I've began. So, I would argue that, you've got to have a beginning for automation. But I would say that automation is very critical to the success of an organization.
Yeah, just to add on there, in your intro, you talked about customer success tools, and we talked about case management and CRMs and all these things. And in a broad sense, yes, they're all about the customer experience and servicing the customer. But if you really go back and look at many of these systems, they're systems of record for organizations that have existed, since software was being delivered, right? Case management tools. I wrote Sybase's case management system in 1988. That case management system took them public to 500 reps, right? And, so that was my introduction to actually automating, at scale. But those are all systems of record. And I, in my consulting practice, helping companies figure out their customer success cadence and do a lot of automation, I ask a simple question: do you know who your customers are? And you would be amazed, and this is not just a startup problem, you would be amazed that the majority cannot run a report that gives them the exact number of customers. And drill down into that. How many customers are in onboarding? How many customers are here? How many customers are paying this? What's your upper segment? People can't answer those questions. It's just that fundamental. And so the way I look at this master customer record, it's kind of all these other systems hang off it. Jira is how you're tracking stuff in engineering, both bugs and feature requests, both of which influence customer success and happiness and progress and all that good stuff. You got marketing systems, and you're sending campaigns out and touching people and nurturing in various ways, right? We all know the Zendesks in the cloud, Service Cloud, and all that sort of stuff, but they're tied together by who your customer is. So, a lot of people are just in Excel for that, right? So unless you figure out this hub, right? So when I think of customer success now, I'm getting very specific, where you're starting to pull all of these things into a cohesive view of your customer, and then the new technologies are adding things that didn't exist, right? Tracking the customer journey, having automation, Shirisha talked about that. I could go on and on about what some of these platforms do that never existed before. So you've got your system of record that should be in place, and if they're not, you got to get them in place. And then you have this whole new layer of things that are very innovative that didn't exist. And they can share information back to those systems of record. So I look at the platforms like we mentioned, Blue Nose, Client Success, Strikedeck, Gainsight, Tango. It's a new breed of platform that sits in between all these systems of record. And without the master customer record, it falls apart.
So there seems to be a consensus here that the first system should be that CRM, that system of record. Anybody want to challenge the experts? There used to be these radio shows where you challenge experts on like music and stuff. This is your chance to challenge the experts.
Oh,
No?
there's no gong. You gotta. My age is showing.
Well, Axway
Half
must
the
have
room
a
doesn't know what the
for
gong show is.
Signing new deals or something. We can get the gong here, right? So let's assume that we all agree, because no one challenged us, that the first system should be that system of record to figure out who the customers are with the slicing and dicing. What's next? What's the most important second one?
Do you want to tackle that one first?
Sure. Just one clarification on the master customer record, just to be very specific. That is who is your customer, you know, the company and where they're located, et cetera. It is who the contacts are at that customer, what role they play, what title. I mean, it's who's who in the zoo. And the third thing is what have they bought from you? Exactly. When did they buy it? When does it renew? How much does it cost? Most organizations will have a case tracking tool. I don't know many folks who get into a support or an engineering role and don't implement tracking tools. So I find folks have those things already. They're not necessarily tied and in sync with who they think their customers are, so they run a little bit in a silo. But most of the customer automation I do starts with those three things, plus product telemetry, if you can get it. Sometimes the marketing system is of interest, but really as a start, if you know who your customers are, you have a decent case tracking tool, because let's face it, even though that's a reactive posture break fix, it's a very important piece of the software service puzzle. And so I you know, that's a very critical piece, and as you introduced me, that's kind of where I came from. And then engineering, you know, has got the back end in terms of the product related things. And with those three things, you can start to pull together a cohesive, you know, larger view of the customer in, you know, in a customer success platform that's not really a point solution. You know, it's not in-app messaging or, you know, some email or, you know, it's not a point solution. It's really an end-to-end tool to view and manage your customer, provide the analytics, and, you know, there's a ton of features buried within there, you know, but that's really what you need to get started. And then from there, I view this as an ongoing journey, because new tools come out, marketing gets more sophisticated, engineering gets more sophisticated, support gets better, new stuff comes out, and as long as you're still able to pull that into this cohesive view of the customer, it just empowers you as a customer success professional. I kind of view it as a cockpit of the plane, right? I need to understand all the systems and how they're interfacing with the customer. And I need to have that at my fingertips to properly take whatever actions are needed, you know, to satisfy whatever I'm trying to do with the customer.
Hey, Mark. Great commentary, and thank you, Kelly. Just absolutely agree. Customer master record. Just one color commentary on top of that is that a lot of customers have implemented customer 360, et cetera, and they have the 360 view of the customer. Unfortunately, the data quality is so bad it's not usable. So that's the other sort of dimension to this, which is usable data, even though they've implemented the right structure.
Well, what's interesting about that, and I've encountered that many times, is, you know, and this is a customer support example. When I went to Commerce One as the SVP of customer success or support at that time, you know, it was a 130-person worldwide organization. That was the black sheep of the company because customers were not very happy. And their data was a mess. But I started running reports and showing them to executives. That's the data. Well, the data's not right. Okay, well, let's get down to why it's wrong. Let's fix it. Oh, you're not doing your job. You're not, you know, let's get it right. And we're going to run those damn reports until they're right. Because I'm not going to my CEO or the board with a report on my business if it's half-baked. So I just literally kept running those reports, and man, people got their data correct because it was transparent. So as long as everybody gets to ignore that the data's all shitty, it'll just stay that way, right? And it got to the point where I would go to meetings. There weren't a lot of interesting web tools at that point. And so my business development director every Monday morning had a binder of colorful metrics that I'd go to every meeting with. And they're like, oh shit, here comes Pecoraro. Because the data doesn't lie, right? And you're right, it has to be accurate. But you start exposing that, and you'll start to generate some change in these organizations.
This is when Pecoraro became a verb, like to
Yes.
do something, is going to Pecoraro me.
I got famous for that one.
So let me make sure that I understand. So we talked about it has to start with a source of truth, which is some sort of a CRM. You then add, probably in parallel, have been adding the more transaction-oriented support and product functions, and you want to collect them together into a more coherent system. What's the third phase then? What's more important? Which is the next tier after those?
In my mind, it's metrics.
Then you should speak what's on your mind.
Well, I think I'm gonna. Don't mind if I do.
Boy, that's different.
We know each other too well. Yeah, in my mind, it's metrics. I think that, once you've got a really good, clean view of your customer base and you've got a good 360 degree, and you don't have to have all of the solutions. There are a lot of things that you can do if you don't bolt every single thing. It's great if you can. But let's face it, resources are tight at some of the smaller companies. Everybody has a workload. We've got day jobs, and bolting systems together isn't always something that everybody can focus on all the time. And so, even if you can get a 180-degree view of your customer, I would argue you could then begin to understand some of your metrics. And, it's really interesting. I've now that I'm working at a hardware company and I've got a SaaS background, a lot of the metrics that I talk about, people, they think, oh, well, these are SaaS metrics, and they're really not. These are customer success metrics, right? Because the metrics that you can start to leverage once you have your 360-degree view, you can look at churn, you can look at your systemic issues, you can look at your revenue churn, you can look at your caseload, what's your time to first value, when customers churn, when do they churn, right? Is it in the first year? Well, if it happens in the first year, you can easily walk that back into there's some kind of drama with your onboarding program, right? And there's a lot of change that you can impart onto your company once you really understand your metrics. And in my experience, once I have my hands even on the 180-degree view, if that's what I've got to work with, and I can pull some kind of customer success metrics that give me information on the health of my customer base, I can start to put my foot on the gas around where am I going to put my humans and where am I going to put my computers, right? Because that's when I'm going to really understand what I'm going to automate. There's certain things at the early stage of an organization that you can automate, right? Obviously, your customer engagement. You can automate some of your case management if that touches into your customer success program. There's some of those early wins. But in my mind, the metrics tell me what I'm automating most. And then, when I've got my all-star players on the team, because they're great at these things, right? And if you're going to scale and if you're going to continue to grow, that's when you can pick your battles and figure out, like I said, where are you going to put your people, where are you going to put your computers? Yeah.
So I agree with Keri, but I see it as kind of a layer cake to get to those metrics. So once you have this data consolidated and you have a platform, one of the foundation elements is workflow. Understanding what your customer journey is, but how do you get that put into a system so you can literally ask questions like, who's where in the journey? But there's all kinds of workflow that CSMs engage with every day. Playbooks, tasks, calendars, it's somewhat basic stuff, but it is that system of record for what the CSM does, right? And then because you're sitting on all of this data, right, then you can start to implement data-driven automation. Well, if 2 P1s come in less than 2 days, send the CSM a heads-up email, right? And then, the next layer is you can start to look at your customers different. The white glove, top of the pyramid customers are going to be treated different, dealt with different than the low touch, no touch at the bottom, and maybe the just-in-time touch informed by your data automation in kind of the middle of the pyramid, right? And now, once you have all that, you can start to talk about a health framework. And there's various ways to look at that. But in the biggest, broadest sense, you can start to say, it's kind of iterative. There's no magic health score formula. And if you find it, please call me immediately, right?
I want to invest.
I want to invest. But it's a hypothesis, and you iterate and you get smarter over time, and you use that kind of health to get better, more accurate, but also to start to highlight and get proactive. And then on top of that, I view the KPIs of all of that. And it helps me as an executive manage, but boy, the transparency it puts out to the rest of the company, that is equally as important. At Conviva, where we implemented client success a couple years back, we had a great implementation, and my boss had taken over the CRO role and essentially was on the road for 3 months, and I didn't see him. And he'd schedule one-on-ones and cancel all the time. And so I said, I want to show you what we've accomplished. And when he came back from this 3-month revenue trip, he scheduled 30 minutes with me. It ended up being a 90-minute meeting where I demoed the system and showed him the graphs and the metrics. And he fell off his chair. He's like, I've never seen something like this before. This is amazing. And I could tell you more stories about different vendors and different CEOs, but the same conversation, right? So those KPIs and those metrics with all those foundational elements, are really powerful, right? Because customer success also sits, I believe, kind of at the center of the company. It's not a silo off, in the right, on this hall that just you deal with customer stuff. Man, the customers pay the paycheck. If the products, the marketing, how we sell, the customer is at the center of this stuff. So using those KPIs and that data, not just to manage the group better and be better, and deal with churn and revenue and all the things that are important, but pushing that back into the systemic places of the company where some of the problem issues start is really powerful as well.
There's a young lady, before we move on, there's a young lady over here with a question.
Yes, young lady.
I love the multiple dimensions of how you are shedding light to the problem. So I like what you mentioned with respect to automation with the case management, Keri, and then Mark was alluding more towards how do you measure it with the workflow and move from a system of record to a system of intelligence, right? Which is pretty much what you were alluding to. So the question for both of you at this point would be, can we just drill a little bit deeper into it? If we go into that system of intelligence for a case management automation, let's just say, right? So what would that metrics be that you would look into that would get there?
Sure. So, as you can tell, I'm sorry, excuse me. As you can tell, I like to do it backwards than what Mark likes to do. And so, a lot of the metrics, it depends on what I have my hands on for data as to what metrics I'm going to start with. But if I were to use, case management as an example, I would look at what is the easiest stuff, right? Who calls in the most for what? As an example, does your product have an unlocking code? And let's face it, everybody loses their unlocking code. Can you automate that? Right? Because your humans should be dealing with tier 2 and 3 cases. Whereas an unlocking code can come out of your system of record, you shove it into your Zendesk, somebody pushes the go button, it's done. You don't even have to push the go button. You can create rule-based engine now in Zendesk, and you have an if this then that scenario, and you have magic. So it could be something as easy as that, right? So the metric would be what happens most frequently. And then from there, the question should be, can it be automated? And if the answer is no, that's where I do it backwards than what he does. Because if the answer is no, then I want to know why. And then what's the workflow, right? So how do we optimize? And, what's the best way to skin the proverbial cat? And then I'll let him talk about the other way that he likes to do it.
Backwards way.
Well, I don't disagree with Keri. It's, I think we just view it and kind of discuss it a little different. Because when, I ran support organizations globally for 20 years. And, I'm a builder and a fixer, not a maintainer. So all the things I got into were big, audacious, hairy problems that had to be solved. And, I don't want to call support a silo, but the very first thing I did do, whether the data was clean or not, is look at the various things she just talked about. Why is the backlog so big compared to the incoming cases? And if we broke it down by product line or region or customer segment, you get to the root systemic cause of a lot of other things going on within the company. In Commerce One, it was a very serious product development, product release management issue. It had nothing to do with support. But the support metrics led us to the core, what was really wrong here. You can scream at support all day. They didn't do their job well, they didn't answer the phone, customers are screaming. But my little metrics book got action and fixed the problem. But I would expect each of the organizations to be analyzing their, are we fixing bugs quick enough? Are we responsive to feature requests? What's interesting about the customer success automation is it becomes an overlay to all those things. So I don't really disagree with Keri. I'm just kind of looking at those as the pillars underneath the broader platform that we as customer success professionals leverage to do our jobs.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. I was listening to you, and some differences, but I think the core of what you talk about is the same. We have to have a system of record, otherwise we can't baseline anything, and it's the heart of what connectivity is among different systems. Then we need to add a layer of the must-have functions for support, for products, etc. And then both of you agree that the next thing to do before you go into any specific application to improve whatever is metrics. And I think that makes sense because when I think about if you want to do anything else, you need to get budget. If you want to get budget, you need to apply for that, right? To apply for that, you need to convince the rest of the management team, your CFO, etc., that there is a problem and there is a path for the solution. You can do that without metrics. So I actually very much agree with that progression. Anybody disagree? Again, beat the expert now? No?
I don't think it's on anymore.
Of course it is.
Oh, there you are.
Mic is on.
Great. So we talked about what systems a little bit. We talked about when. Let's talk a little bit about how to best implement solutions. Starting with who makes the decision, who's the buyer, who's the approver for buying CS automation solutions? Is that the CEO? Is that
I'm gonna let you go first.
sales? Is that the CFO?
So my experience, and I'll caveat this with, in the last decade where my customer success focus has been, I've been kind of a Silicon Valley software SaaS startup guy, Series A, B, C, type organizations. And, in a VP of customer success or head of customer success role, I was absolutely the person driving the need for that, because it'd be like, could you imagine taking over a support organization like I went into in 1988 and, they tracked their tickets with stickies, literally walking around. So I was the business driver, but I had to convince CFO, CFO wants to know the ROI. I mean, they just want to talk numbers, but getting support from my peers as to how it's going to benefit them was also really helpful. Right? Because I was part of the sales organization. So showing them how we could do better and pave the path for customers to, implement better, quicker, faster, and how that could affect renewals and lessen their role at having to do kind of the account management stuff, which was not necessarily in line with their quotas to go get new revenue, was pretty enticing. And, I implemented Blue Nose. It was actually Ad Accelerator for my boss, the CRO, and he went to Conviva and then recruited me. But when I got to Conviva, he had already bought Blue Nose. It was just sitting on the shelf ready to go, because he was that sold on how important this was for his sales team. I had another situation with Strikedeck where we started doing NPS and looking at different customer segments. And the client's NPS was horrifically low. And we had enough data to kind of say, we have a feeling where this is. And it was very much in the product realm. And when I showed that to the head of product, she said, could we meet weekly? I want to know every single thing that comes in. And would you broker a few calls? Because some of these comments are really disturbing and I want to understand this better. So getting people in your boat, this is not like go fix CS in a silo. Starting to provide this intelligence back gets a lot of people enthusiastic, because it's not just about customer success focused inward, but it's, and obviously you're focused on the customer, but within the company, this becomes very powerful. So get those people on your side, because everybody's going to benefit.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, it's really interesting because I don't know if we didn't really talk about Blue Nose, but just to give you a very quick who's who in the zoo, Blue Nose Analytics is no longer, but I spent 4 years of my career building customer success technology. During that time, what was really, really interesting is nobody really had their own budget. So customer success leadership, by and large, didn't necessarily have a seat at the table at that time. Some did, but it was a very unique situation to where the head or the chief customer officer or the VP of customer success really had their own budget that they had carte blanche to do something with. By and large, historically, customer success leaders are always beholden to somebody else's budget, right? And it's still that way today in some organizations, and we're seeing the emergence of customer success, and therefore now we're getting our own voices heard, and we're getting seats at the table, and we have bigger budgets, and we still don't have budgets that look like that of our marketing friends or our sales friends, but we're getting there, right? And I think that there's only one win at a time that's going to get us there from here. And so through that experience, that's talking about budget, who has the budget. We're seeing that evolve today. But there's a couple strategies that I would leave you with to kind of understand in the event that you don't have your own budget. I really like what Mark is saying in terms of getting people on board. In my mind, and what we used to do at Blue Nose was we used to help leaders get others involved in the need and the desire for customer success. Because a lot of sales personalities will build a team that's based on a land and expand model. However, the expand model kind of falls on its face without the support of customer success. Therefore, now we have a symbiotic relationship that says, you need to help me. I don't have a budget. You have the budget, but I'm your expand piece, so let's work together, right? So there is a strategy that you can use. That's one of the best levers to pull because they usually have the deepest pockets. But you can also look at other other areas in the organization. So just a quick tip for you guys.
Yeah. So Keri, as the first CSM head,
Yeah.
you're changing the culture.
Yes.
The internal culture.
Yeah.
So there's a big, you're using social capital.
That's right.
Just can you that's a steep curve.
Yeah, Artie, thank you. Did you guys hear his question? So just to repeat it, he's asking, I'm person number one at a very large organization, and where am I headed? And basically, he's suggesting that my existence is disruptive, and I don't mean that in a negative term because it is, and those are the words that I would absolutely use. My existence at an organization like Juniper is highly, highly disruptive because it does drive change into the culture and really the DNA of the organization. Now, I will tell you that at Juniper, I'm very lucky and I'm really spoiled, which is the reason why I took the job, is because they know they need change, they want change, and they're very excited for it. So, they're investing heavily. It is a top of mind conversation. I just spent 2 days at Salesforce. Customer success was the thing. I mean, we were sweating customer success after 16 hours in the tower. So, I have to say my situation is very unique, but yes, it is very disruptive. But my strategy is to harness that energy and really treat it like I was surfing a wave. Because I think that it will do us all good, right? Pick some small wins, get the business even more excited, and then continue to expand. But it's got to be a slow and steady pace. I can't just go in and go, well, I'm going to splash the pool, and I just entered the pool, right? That's the corporate immunoresponse is a very real thing. There's one more question.
Sorry, yes.
Hey, Keri, I really like the, you mentioned how you automate the process based on the data, right? So I would like to know, do you guys use, robotic automation process, or how do you see that trend? You can share with us.
I love that question. Not today, but it is on my mind and in my plan. It's just going to not be within the next 12 months. Because we have some work to do with the data and the systems and all of that. But yes, machine learning absolutely has a role to play at a business like Juniper. At Oracle, when I was at Oracle, we did use a machine that had that had machine learning capabilities. Like I said, I just sat in a room at Salesforce for 2 full days. They've got a machine learning technology, AI, right now that they call Einstein. And wow, where do I sign? That's an amazing technology. So yes, it has a role to play, but I've got to get there first. Do you want to add anything about that?
No, you said it all.
Okay.
I can, by the way, add a couple, just one minute, couple of examples on the topic of who's paying, who's the decision, how to get collaboration. I work at a company called OpenGo, which is a 200 people, Series C startup that provides services, software and services to governments. And two solutions that I have bought in late 2017, I use one in collaboration with a sales ops team in a communication space. We bought a tool called Comico that helps with communication management. And another one we bought or licensed, right, a tool called WalkMe for in-app guidance, right, driving adoption, and that was a joint project with the product team. And in both of those, I leaned heavily on budgets from those two teams to justify. So I did the legwork, I went to look for vendors, I did a business case, but I leaned on them for some of the budget to enable both the agreement to buy, but also the ability to pay for it.
Yep.
So,
Good example.
getting on that.
Yeah.
Excellent. You had a question.
So you guys have talked about the operational side of the technology and using it internally. And I guess I'm kind of curious, that's a sort of inside-out view, and I understand the technology typically is to serve the inside view, but I'm wondering if you have any thoughts at all about kind of how do you turn that to, where does having customer success technology impact the value to the end customers?
Yeah.
What's the ROI to the customers, not to the company?
Yeah, I love that question. And that is it. You just said the magic words. It's to illustrate ROI, right? Because, I mean, let's face it, customers don't grow and retain if they're not getting ROI from the vendor that they're doing business with. Customer success technology can drive the illustration of that ROI, right? So many times when we were at Blue Nose, we had no qualms about showing the customer their scorecard. I consider you to be a red account, and here's why. Here's what you're not adopting. This is what you're not using. These are the risks. This is what you're at risk. And then, and I hate to use this word, but I think that it kind of, words have meaning, and I think that this is a good one. But there's a certain peer pressure that you can put on customers by benchmarking them and saying, we've got 3 other retail businesses that look just like yours, and they're doing this, this, and this, and you're red. Here's your... And a lot of people in customer success, that makes them queasy to do that because you're worried about, I don't want to upset the customer. I don't want to, I'm here to make you happy. But here's the thing, you're not there to make them happy. They can only be in charge of their own happy. You can't be in charge of anybody's happy. Don't worry about upsetting them. Tell them the truth. Tell them what's going on. You're not utilizing the technology, or you are utilizing your technology and you're so green, you're like Kelly Green and we love you. Can we talk about your use case to other people? Will you advocate for us, right? That's a tool to go in either direction, either turn an account around or turn them into advocates. So great question, Irene, thank you. Do you want to add to that?
I think you hit it
100%
perfectly.
agree with that statement. I think in my experience, customers respond better to benchmarking than to ROI, which means the peer pressure in many cases is even more impactful than how much money they save.
Yep.
Right? So you can go to a customer and say, hey, my assessment showed that you're saving 400%. That has value to it. And if you show them you're on the lower 25 percentile, and here's what your peers are doing, you'll drive them into action even more.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
No, I think you nailed it in terms of those examples. Just starting with the basics, customer purchases your solution to solve a business problem, right? And they write a check. And then there's this time between where the check gets written and we're doing all this stuff, whatever, onboarding, implementation, kickoff, whatever your process may be. But that time to value now can be orchestrated, measured, focused on, so that you can get to those conversations, right? Kick off a customer with understanding their business goals and objective, put them in, track them, get them to value quickly, because they didn't write a check just to write a check, and be able to use the metrics we've talked about and all the examples she gave. I don't like using the term QBR because it kind of comes out of a sales cadence of quarterly. It's just really an executive discussion or a business review, right? We met, if you tell me on September 17th, I have to have X to get my bonus, well, now we know what we're tracking towards, right? So we're going to have the right meetings and the right discussion. So if I can get to value, and I completely agree with Keri about the transparency piece. This is not about happy, right? This is just absolutely not about happy. It is about getting the value, expanding the value. And a lot of times customer success, when it comes to the expansion piece, they go, oh, we're not in sales. Well, it used to be we're all in sales. Well, we're now all in customer success. And the reality of it is just listening to the customer and understanding the next phase of their business goals and then going, wait a minute, we can help them with that. You're adding value. You're not there in some, snakeskin suit trying to sell them something they don't need. You're listening to what they said and going, we can do something about this. So internally, you're expanding in revenue and all those metrics and, with an internal focus, yay. But you're really helping the customer do what they need to do to move the ball along. And underneath all of this is what we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes. So you can intelligently be doing this stuff, right? It's not a guess, it's not a whim, it's not which way the wind's blowing. There's an art and a science to all of this, but the automation and the data kind of puts the science piece in a box, if you will. There's still an art to a lot of this, right? There's no perfect solution.
Well, if there wasn't an art and just science, none of us would have a job and
Exactly.
we automate the whole thing. I want to build on Irene's comment, which I thought was very thoughtful, and take it to the next level. Is the automation that you are trying to do at companies you work at change based on the level of touch that you have with customers? High touch, low touch, tech touch, etc.
Absolutely. I have a client right now that's a 12-person startup, and I'm in the process of writing a blog that you can never be too small to automate, right? And the reality of it is that even with one CSM, kind of one of everything, it's a very white glove, small company, there's 30 customers, but 10 of them are strategic. And the ability to have a very transparent, high-touch set of functionality to allow the entire team to see what's going on is very powerful. That's entirely different from a company that sells maybe more to a business to consumer, or a much broader and lower touch where you're touching the customer but not necessarily with human beings. And that's part of the customer segmentation. For many companies, you have a little of both. And so a lot of these solutions need to get mapped to how you do things. Some companies are only going to be small numbers of customers, super, super high touch, which is a very different problem or challenge than when you have 10,000 customers, 150 are strategic, right? 1,000 are super important, and the rest need to be managed, but you can't throw humans at that solution. So that's a huge piece of what needs to be thought out. And when in my consulting business, I always ask the clients, what is customer success to you, and what are you trying to drive to? Because every company has a different DNA to it. There is no one size fits all to this stuff, and that's the challenge. And I've actually even done vendor evaluation projects, and it's really it's very challenging. It's very challenging because there's a lot of functionality out there. There's a lot of innovation. And companies think this is the way it's going to go, but anybody who's been in a startup, knows that you go through gyrations that, take you to 3 or 4 Gs at times, right? We think we're going to here, but we have to pivot, right? And so, that's just a piece of the equation you need to think through.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with that completely. The only thing that I would add is, to your question, automation. Your customers, you cannot service all of your customers in the same way, though we may want to, and our hearts are in it. And if you're anything like me, you feel a little bit of guilt because the person that's giving you $100 ARR has got to stand at the back of the line. You know, I mean, it doesn't feel very good. I'm not going to lie about it. I don't like it. But the reality is that, you know, we don't have enough money and we don't have enough humans that to Mark's point, we can't just throw, you know, bodies at that. And, you know, when you look at your customer segmentation and you start to realize that you're going to have to start changing the way that you service your customers based upon the amount of money that you're getting from them and their expectation and their need from you, right? And it's got to be a win-win on both sides. Otherwise, your segmentation model is going to fail. We can talk about that in another meetup. But in any case, I think that's technology is really going to help you scale when you start getting into the just-in-time or the JIT model and the tech touch. That's where you can really do a lot of very cool things because, you know, you can create, you know, what I call adoption marketing models where you are consuming telemetry data out of your own product, client success, Gainsight, Strikedeck. I don't see where Srisha went. There he is. You know, Strikedeck, these guys, you know, they're very good at taking usage data and doing something, helping you to do something with it. So, you know, you can wire up, you know, this is where machine learning can also come into play, and depending on what kind of systems you have, but you can wire up adoption campaigns, right? Think about it as customer success marketing, right? ABC software company hasn't pushed the print button in a long time, and you know that the print feature of your product is the sticky feature. You've got metrics that show you that people that don't use the print button churn within 6 months, right? That is a killer metric, and that's something that you can do something about cheaply and automagically, right? And you're nurturing those customers along to be able to do something back inside your own technology, and you're bringing them back. But again, you're still leveraging your people to go do the more strategic conversations that Mark is talking about, right? So anyway, just a couple of ideas there. I like Automagic.
So in a company, if you work for a company that is low touch, do you expect to have more automation tools than a company that is high touch?
It depends on what phase of the business you're in. So I would say if you're in your seed, you're going to love all of your customers the same. Your first 100 customers, you'd better just love the daylights out of them because they're going to get your next 100. They're going to get your next 100, right? So those people are snowflakes. Love them. Throw all the people at them. You can automate some things, but I wouldn't create a tech touch if you're at that stage. You know, from there you can start to scale and you can create tech touch models as you grow up. Do you want to add to that?
Just tell me what you want to be reminded about.
Do you want to be reminded to answer the question?
Good. Talk about tech touch, huh? Apple's listening to us.
Questions? Yes.
Oh, just one comment there that I love that concept of adoption playbooks. I think part of that with a smaller company that wants to do high touch is also, even if they have a small group of CSMs, they may start to look at certain patterns that they're seeing in their cases, and then start to look at, okay, I can automate these plays, and keep adding to their playbook so that they start to move towards more digitization rather than doing those things manually. So even if they're a small CSM team, they can actually scale up pretty quickly.
That's right.
Yep, absolutely.
Exactly.
Yep.
Touching on two different topics, you talked about benchmarks and you talked about segmentation. I ran customer success teams at Salesforce, and we were hyper-focused on metrics, and segmenting by benchmark peer groups was a key component of that, because not only is it what you were talking about, where you can have that conversation with specific customers about where they are within their peer group and how they're performing or not performing to their peers, and even spinning up conversations between those. But also, peer groups will change the definition of what you're driving your KPIs to, because it's one thing to say, I'm measuring this, but what are you measuring and what are you measuring it to? Mm-hmm. And when you are segmenting customers by industry, by revenue size, by enterprise, by SMB, that number you're driving to will change based upon what that peer group is. Mm-hmm. So that's a big component of that.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a good point. Good question.
So I think we are very fortunate. Both Keri and Mark, you advocate for automation, robotics, but I also heard sometimes when the operation folks, the employee, when they heard about robotics, are they going to replace my job? How do we, address the concern culturally and so people can adopt that without concern? What's your advice?
Yeah, I feel like the mic hog. Do you want to go first?
I don't have a lot of experience with the machine learning, but I've never had that concern come up as we're implementing and aggregating data and talking about automation and getting more efficient and doing these levels of things. I think as a leader, if you frame the mission and the goal and you paint a vision of what we're trying to do and how it fits into the corporate culture and goals, then this becomes a plan to facilitate, your customer success strategy within the broader company. If you just leave it at a bunch of buttons and tools and stuff, people's minds will run wild, right? Because you bring up a really valid point, right? Commerce One, same thing. I started running these reports and everybody in support was running around screaming like they were gonna get fired. I'm like, no. Our mission's to fix this and be the heroes of the company. And our SAT scores went from high 6s in Europe and low 7s in the US to 18 months being both above 9.0. And that stayed until the company went into bankruptcy from being a public company. And so, I painted that vision and drove them to it. And we actually became one of the prized groups, within the organization. So you have to, as a leader, you have to paint that vision. Here's where we're going and why, so that people understand their role, right? It's not about, AI is going to replace all these jobs. I mean, to be honest with you, if products were really easy to use and perfect, we would not be having this meetup. That's the truth of the matter is, and we've had this discussion within the Customer Success Leadership Council, just as sales and marketing is a term, right? It's kind of coalesced. They're different groups, but it's kind of one bucket, right? Well, customer success and product is kind of doing the same thing. I'm not saying they're going to become the same groups, but let's face it, if your product is easy to deploy, easy to adopt, gives value super, super quickly, it's like using Facebook. When was the last time you went to the user manual? Never. You don't need to, right? And, it's probably had 2 outages in 5 years. So, I mean, customer success in some respects, and I'm talking very specifically in the SaaS startup, super complex software world, the better the product is, not just because it's technically innovative and whamma jamma, that's all great. But if the customers can't get value for it, you can't throw customer success bodies. So if you really want a goal, it's to not need the organization because the product launches and does what it's supposed to do without all this nurturing and help and QBRs and metrics and benchmarking.
Yeah. I would also add that it's been my experience that most customer success managers are dying for automation, be that AI, machine learning, just a system that's going to automate something, right? Because when you think about what a customer success manager does, and you really look at the nucleus of the onion, they're professional communicators, and that takes time, right? And they need time. That's the one thing that as leaders, that's the one gift that we can give back to our people is time. They can have their weekends back. They can be with their families. They have time to do the QBR that they never get to do because they've got escalations and drama and there's this and there's that. There's so many things to be done. And so in my mind, I've never had anybody be uncomfortable with automation or robotics or anything along that line. So if that's helpful.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. A big theme I'm getting is that there are a lot of different touch points with the customer and different tools out there to automate parts of that process in customer success. In terms of your role right now at Juniper and where you're at with just getting the record together of all the customers, how do you, when building out your customer success program, what are best practices around iterating with the customers in terms of the services they receive? And how do you rapidly prototype that before even investing in a solution?
So let me make sure that I understand what you're asking. I think what I'm hearing is, how do I validate the services that we're going to provide against what the
Yeah.
customer wants? Do I have that right?
Yes, and how do you not design a program that isn't relevant to your customers?
Yeah, right? You got to ask. I mean, in all honesty, I know that this sounds, probably like the least sexy thing that we're going to talk about tonight, but I only know how to do that one way, and that's to ask. I mean, I want to listen. I want to hear. I want to, I've only been at Juniper for a month and a half, and I'm just barely, I haven't even put a scratch into the surface yet, right? I'm still in my diagnostic mode. I'm still trying to figure out who's who in the zoo. But the only way that I'm going to be able to know that my program is relevant and where I'm automating is relevant is when I talk to my customers and I talk about, what are you needing today? What are you getting from us that's great? What are you getting from us that's really not great? And what flat out stinks, right? And I need all of that. Tell me all of it in between, right? And then I want to talk to many people. And the reason why is because, look, we're all emotional. We all, the vendor, there's an issue. Now your boss is mad. So there's always like this human emotion that you have to unpack and peel away from the facts, right? So usually whenever I'm new with any company, I really want to talk to at the minimum 50 customers. And I want them from different segments. I want to talk to the big ones, I want to talk to the medium ones, and I want to talk to the little ones, because that's going to help me to understand, okay, I get it. I'm seeing patterns of behavior here. I'm hearing same words, and I'm able to discern the differences between emotion and reality. And then there's a gentleman back here that has a question.
Well, let me just, you're next. Just leveraging off that, I think the other, I completely agree with what Keri said. A couple of exercises I do along with that is, when you come into a new organization and there's not a lot of customer success structure, there are people and they're doing things, right? And they're doing things with customers, and so the very first thing I do is a really laborious exercise, but it's helpful, is document your existing customer journey. What are the touch points? I'm not saying are they right or wrong. It's not a right or wrong. Just get it out of our heads and get it on paper so you can put it up and everybody can either shake their head or say you're completely wrong. What are the touch points? Where's there friction in the system? Where are there opportunities for improvement? What about supporting assets? What that PowerPoint deck to go do that executive business review? I had a CSM back in my last role running around going, what do I do? you did that thing 4 months ago. Do you have the template? Right? So, it sounds trivial, but having a library of assets where you can go, man, I need this, and this, right? So understanding all that, getting it on paper and stepping back and saying, is this today's reality? It's not right or wrong. It's just that I use the Waze example, right? If I know I want to get home, the only way I could get there from here is knowing where here is, right? And so mapping that out, and then as well as then you talk to the customers, you start to see the correlations where you're falling down and you're not meeting what the customer's needs are. Then you can get into solution mode, which is more forward looking, that says, hey, we know we should be doing it this way. We should have a much more structured handoff from sales because we look like idiots on day one because we don't know what we're talking about. And we should structure our kickoffs and our onboardings to address, X, Y, and Z, right? And all of a sudden, you have the ability to do things in a much more sort of structured way and start to design that future journey. And it's not just inward facing, as Keri points out. You're talking to customers the entire time. Every new role I've taken, I'm doing what Keri's about to do, which is get on a plane and go talk to lots of people.
I want to respond to the very first thing Keri said and the very last thing that Mark said. When I worked in what we called customer advocacy in the 20th century at Sun, and we had to invent this, it was wedged between service and product and sales. Yeah. And the only, we tried metrics, I built executive dashboards, I did all those things, but everybody wanted the metrics, right? And using these kinds of, at the time it was ARPU, and so that kind of, it fit into people's attention span. But the only way to get past the real barriers that kept those three organizations apart was to do what Mark said. which is, yeah, I'll tell you the story about the metrics, and I have the spreadsheets, and I created the process diagrams, and we have some automation, and God knows what was XML, right? But the only way to really get those three parts of the organization to wake up about what the customers were in agony about was you had to be able to tell the story around what's really going on. It's not that the sales guys were perfect. They sold the right thing. The product guys weren't at fault, and the service guys rescued them. So why the hell did we need customer advocacy to begin with? The answer is if you didn't have the story, the metrics was just shit what nobody wanted to do.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. But here's what's fundamentally changed for all of us, right? Is we live in a world that is a subscription business, both professionally and personally. Go look at your Visa card. Seriously, and it's amazing how many, subscriptions are in there. And that's the difference. Is now, if you look at a SaaS company that's, 2, 3, 5, 7 years down the road growing their customer base, and you map out the revenue growth, the majority of that graph is going to be existing customer revenue, and then there's going to be a layer of frosting, which is all the new logos the sales guys are bringing on, and next year they make the bottom part of the graph bigger.
That's right.
It's just economics. It's
Until
really
somebody else shows up with a better subscription model, and that's what we as customer success professionals have to argue for, that says you can't just go around the circle between service, support, and product, right? You better keep an eye on what the customers are going to love and hate, because otherwise your subscription is going to fall off that easily.
Well, and having lived through that era, it was this idea of, with professional services set aside, because you're basically paying for bodies to get a project done, all this other stuff was just seen as a cost center, because you got all the money up front, right? And yeah, you get 15% in maintenance, but it wasn't enough to get the CEO's attention, I guarantee that. I mean, every time we did budgeting back at Sybase, I don't care what I told them or said. I was getting what I was getting. And it was basically the scum left over from the rest of the budgets that were allocated to the important people, right? I mean, that was reality. I could show you graphs of backlogs and customers pissed off, and it doesn't matter. We got all their money, right? But the economics of it are completely different now. And that is the fundamental change that drives why everybody's in customer success.
Yeah, completely agree. I completely agree. I think that, with the onset of technology, and I was talking about this at Salesforce yesterday, as a matter of fact, so it's interesting that this comes up, but with the onset of technology, it's never been easier for a customer to rip and replace a vendor. And vendors are not so fancy that they're different, they're that much different from one another. They may have one or two different cool features. They may be able to do one thing or two things that the other guy, whatever that looks like, right? But at the end of the day, when you prop up the vendor space, you take CRM, right? You put Salesforce, Oracle, SAP, you put all those guys together, and at the core, they're not different, right? And that's why they have the space. And the only thing that drives the growth and the retention of that customer base is the way that you service the customer. And to Mark's point, that's the differentiation between, all of the different vendors in whatever the given space is that vendor's ability to drive value, be consistent, and deliver for that customer.
I have a couple of more questions, and I want to leave time for some more interaction and networking. Tom, you were waiting so patiently.
Oh, it's a Tom question.
I know.
It's a Tom question. You're getting this one, man.
Yay, Tom.
So I have a question. When you invest in technology, who does stuff, what they do, how they do it all changes, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So how do you view bringing on the next piece of technology, right? So when is an organization kind of internalized a piece of technology so that it's right to move on to the next one? Do you have how do you think about that, or what are your guidelines?
Oh, I love that question.
Oh, good, then you can start, right?
As a technologist,
Right.
I want my vendor to give me customer success.
Okay.
I expect it. And I'm a stickler for it. So if I ever become one of your customers, spoil me. But no, in all honesty, I want to know, what's my utilization? What's it look like? Is my team adopting? Are they using under protest and they're just not telling me about it, right? I want to know. And I'm looking to the vendor to tell me, I'm a red account, I'm a green account. Tell me about my benchmarks. I mean, I expect to get customer success.
Will you pay for customer success?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got experience in monetizing customer success programs as well. And I think that if you're not tied to revenue, that's a problem.
Yep.
Yeah, at Conviva, we had what we call Diamond CSM. So the normal free CSM helped enable you to be successful, right? Adoption, et cetera. And then the premium helped you to do the stuff because you didn't have, the resources to do it. And I think over 50% of our customers paid handsomely for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd like to make a comment on that because I know very few companies out there that charge for customer success management. But I think a lot of companies are charging for the customer success function. They just call it different ways.
Yeah.
Because just like in the older days of enterprise software, customers never wanted to pay for project management, yet we all know you can't do without them. You can run a project without project management, and the customer always pushed back, oh no, I'll do that, don't worry. That doesn't work. So we are selling premium support, and we're selling higher SaaS on the core, etc. When you design your CSM function, figure out how it's going to get paid, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a line item, in my mind, on the order form. Because if it's a line item and the customer says no, then what do? You really want to do that, so you're getting stuck.
Well, and it just underscores that the second S in SaaS is service. You're buying a service. You're not buying software anymore. You're buying a service. And the service should be packaged appropriately. And what's behind the web browser and the cell phone? Who cares? Deliver me the value in the service you sold me. One follow-up, Tom, and once again, I just give the caveat that it's the startup world that I've come from. I think you need to understand what you're trying to do, and I've talked about knowing your existing customer journey and then mapping a future journey. That'll start to inform you as to what you need to automate. But in every organization I've been in, my approach has been violently get to V1. It's not a perfection goal. If you go for a perfection goal, I guarantee you're gonna have a failure goal because there's just too many dynamics in what's going on in the business we're in. It's part of the fun, but it's part of the reality. So get to that V1 that solves a fundamental business problem. We don't have transparency, and we have no KPIs, and we need to help our CSMs because they're dying in support tickets. Fix that problem. But it is an iterative process. It doesn't stop. Once you have the foundation and the metrics, anytime you show your CEO or whoever the chart and the graph, they're going to go straight to the red and say, what the hell's going on? Click, click, what's going on? Click, click, what's going on? Right? And that'll start to inform you, boy, if we had better this in-app messaging, if we did this differently, we could really avoid some friction points, right? So it's not about sitting back going, how many of these things do I need and when? Solve your first foundational problem and grow with it and iterate and realize it isn't going to be perfect. But doing nothing is guaranteed to be imperfect, right?
Yeah. Hi, Omid.
Hi, Omid.
Last question.
Wait, he had a question. Weren't you?
Yeah.
I wasn't just blurting out hi, I promise.
You want us to leave?
Fascinating discussion. And you mentioned the fundamental core problem that CEOs need to pay attention to. We talked about tools and technology for customer success, and regardless of whether you do high touch or tech touch, you do need technology, right, for each of those engagement models. There hasn't been much discussion about what expectation do you have actually from your own products, the capabilities that you like to see in your products to make it more amenable for customer success. We talked about, it was a little conversation about telemetry, maybe make the product more adoptable, usage, but are there guidance that you can provide to the product organizations in your company? For example, Keri, you coming from SaaS background, now that you're working with Juniper, which is it's a company that's changing its business model, what capabilities would you like to see in the product to make it more successful for the customer?
Yeah.
You want to grab it?
Do you want to go first, or do you want me to
There
go? Okay. So I think you missed this part. I've only been there a month and a half, so it's hard for me to say at this minute and get really specific. But I can tell you what my style normally is, and probably it'll look something similar to what I'm about to say. Quite honestly, I think that, again, it comes down to the metrics. I want to know what's going on. Where are my escalations coming from, right? Who's using what's being adopted, what's not being adopted. And product managers and engineers have the same desire to consume their own usage data and their own telemetry data, because that's what helps them to understand what their roadmap needs to look like, right? So we're really on the same team for that. So I think that sharing my metrics with them while overlaying the metrics that they're already looking at is, in my mind, what creates goodness between product engineering and customer success, because that then says, okay, you're doing really well here, and marketing team, by the way, you think this is a sticky product or sticky feature. It's actually not. Everybody's using this, right? We need to blast off about this feature, this function, whatever, right? And put that to good use. Then they can be smart about the way that they're managing their own, their bug fixes. I mean, do you really need to fix this one thing when everybody else is using this other? Maybe you just have one customer that's a squeaky wheel, and sadly enough, maybe you got to buy them out. Sometimes we have to make those decisions. So I think that's really kind of the way that I like to influence product, as well as the feature set. But also, look, things happen, and even though customer success likes to beat our chests about we're proactive and things still happen. And Mark would use a different word other than things, and if I wasn't in public, I would say a different word too, but it still happens. And I think that at the end of the day, that information also needs to be fed back to the product and the engineering team so that they really understand this is actually a systemic problem. 85% of my escalated accounts are because of this. Right, this is super broken. Like, please save us. We're getting killed out there. And you buy it usually when you've got the numbers to match. It works. Now, I will say, for those of you that are going to go that route, don't only make it about the number of customers that have issues. You need to be talking to your leadership about the amount of revenue that is at risk. So if you have a risk program, yeah, that's right. It's at risk. This is revenue that's at risk. So, we've got 85% of our customer cases because the print button is broken, and that translates into $50 million across the next, 6 months. I'm pretty sure they're going to want to mobilize on that, right? Do you want to add?
Yeah. I would say, as a VP of customer success, the head of product is like my first best friend. Yeah. There's a couple prerequisites to customer success working. The leadership has to be bought in, or else it's just going to fail. So what Keri's talking about, the excitement that's happening at Juniper, is an opportunity to take that bull by the horns and succeed. The second thing is the product. If the product doesn't work, if the product doesn't add value, you can throw bodies at it. The CFO won't let you hire that many, but you're not going to solve the problem. I interviewed with a CEO who had a 300-person company, and I said, well, how big's the CS organization? And he said, about 30 people. And I thought, yeah, that's a pretty big commitment to the customer success function, but I was in my own mind, my customer success function. And he said, 3 of those are customer facing. And he said, the rest are analysts. I'm like, what are analysts? Long story short, they were tech support people dealing with escalations. And he finally said, they're a Band-Aid for our product deficiencies. And I said, have a great day, right? Because if you don't have a roadmap to fix that, you can hire anybody. Hire Tom, Irene, me, Boaz. It's going to be failure. So product is so essential to customer success functioning that the head of product has to be like this with the head of customer success. what I've also found in the shift from the old perpetual world to the world we live in now is that, yeah, there was outward focus about what the market needs and all this and that, but then we went into 9-month development cycles, right? And then releases got delayed and blah, blah, blah. And it was very inwardly focused and not very dynamic. Well, in this world is very different. I've noticed product people are very, very outwardly focused and very interested in getting the metrics. And it's not only the stuff like Keri pointed out, what are the cases and what's causing them, but you can also do it in context of revenue, health, time to value. And I find product people, they have pride in what they do. They don't want to build something that doesn't work. And so by sharing that data back with them, they can get, it becomes a really great synergy. And if that synergy is not there between your voice of customer programs and what's going on and support and so forth, if you don't have some level of communication loop with product that's healthy, it doesn't mean you have to agree on everything. It doesn't mean when you say jump, they say how high. But you have some level of getting the truth from the customer perspective back into product and some way of analyzing and segmenting what's important. The product team wins too, right? And that needs to be a win for them. So I see product in CS, and that's why my comments earlier about customer success and product kind of becoming, the power couple, as Irene puts it.
So, real quick, can I moderate for just a quick second and steal your thunder?
Do you want to moderate?
Just for a second, please, just for a second. Okay, here we go.
I want to be
All right,
Keri.
just for a second. Okay, so my question, well, you have to let me moderate all the way now.
Sorry.
So my question to you is, talking about all of that, what automation tools and what way would you automate some of that process to be able to give that communication back into your product friends?
The example I gave before was pretty powerful in terms of voice of customer related feedback, right? The data in terms of the customer rankings, if they're not very good, we were able to systemically go back to what those core issues are. Much like what you pointed out on the support, piece of the puzzle. Get to the systemic root cause. There's telemetry of what they're doing, and you want them to touch everything, but are they touching the areas that bring the value? Because you've done the analysis of what leads to success and failure. One of the exercises I tend to go through when I get into a new situation is, let's talk about a customer that's just wildly successful. What happened? How'd they start? Would you sell them? Analyze that. And where'd they get to? Why? Well, we had this great relationship and we did this and we did that. Understand that success, dissect it. And then, unfortunately, let's go to that customer who churned and pull that apart, and dissect that. And you learn a lot in both in success, and failure. And then you can get a lot more specific. You've got support, you've got bugs, you've got telemetry, and those are all kind of product data feeds, if you will. Put it in a context that's meaningful for the product team.
I think this is a very good question and a very good conversation. I'll be very tactical, specific on what I think is challenging and therefore important to do in the relationship with product. One, engage with the product team for them to prioritize getting telemetry out of your product. It's not always trivial, and when you have a list of priorities that the product team has, devoting resources to measure things as opposed to building another feature for the customer is not always trivial. But if you want to do your job well as a CS person, you need to have that. So focus on getting that, point number one. Point number two, figure out ways, maybe it's productize or processize, right? Not everything is automated, to make sure that your product team gets continuous high level of feedback from customers embedded into their decision making. So you need to be the person, because you're the interface to customers, to make sure that happens. Whether this is surveys, whether this is user groups, whether this is customer meetings, bring them with you. Figure out the mechanism to embed as much knowledge from customers and quantify it so the product team has it ongoingly. Point number two. And that requires time. And time is what nobody has enough of. So you need to lobby for that to happen and a commitment from the product team to do. And the third thing that I would advise, kind of the third in priority, is a closed feedback loop between the customer requests for enhancement that go through the product team and back to the customer, so it's not a black hole. We provided 15 enhancement requests 2.5 years ago. We haven't heard anything back, so we stopped giving you feedback, and now your entire company is in a black hole and you don't know what the market wants or not. You need to build, and again, this is an investment from the product team, which means it's hard to get them to do. But if you want to have good relations with your customers and really do what's good for them, you need to build a closed product loop between the customer feedback to you and the feedback back on at least when you're going to do what they asked to do, and if you decide not to do it, why you decided not to do. So there's a closed loop on that.
Totally agree.
I think we ran a little bit over time, and again, I do want to enable time here. So thank you for the panelists. I should have said over there, but thank you for Mark and Keri. Thank you, Axway and Shrisha and Strikedeck for the food and the location and sponsoring the event.
Thank
you
you.
for
Thank you
coming.
very much.